Welcome to our channel. In this video, we're taking a deep dive into the extraordinary journey of a man who started as a small-town radio announcer and ended up as one of America's best-loved entertainers. From his early days in Bristol, Tennessee, a locale steeped in the roots of country music, to his wartime service in World War II and breakthrough as a comedic radio personality, Ford embodied the spirit of mid-century America. Yet behind his iconic baritone voice and crossover hits lay personal struggles that would ultimately overshadow his staggering achievements. Join us as we explore how Tennessee Ernie Ford's charm, humor, and vocal talent propelled him to stardom, and discover the heartbreaking challenges he faced behind the scenes. Early life and radio beginnings. Tennessee. Ernie Ford, born Ernest Jennings Ford, came into the world on February 13, 1919, in Bristol, Tennessee, a place often celebrated as a cradle of country music. His parents, Maud and Clarence Toms Ford, were no strangers to the rural rhythms of life in early 20th century America, while his older brother, Stanley H. Ford, provided a sibling presence that colored young Ernest's formative experiences. In the 1910s and 1920s, Bristol served as a living tapestry of musical traditions. Sacred gospel hymns poured out of local churches, and fiddles, banjos, and guitars brought the melodies of country and Western music to life in parlors and community events. Growing up in such an environment, Ford couldn't help but be captivated by the soulful resonance of early country music, which during this time was beginning to establish itself as more than just mountain music or hillbilly tunes. Even as a child, he sensed the emotional and cultural depth that coursed through the songs his family and neighbors held dear. From his earliest memories, Ford was attuned to the powerful presence of radio, a device that had quickly become an American household staple. By the mid-1920s and 1930s, radio stations were proliferating, and in regions like Appalachia, local broadcasts were vital in connecting isolated communities with outside news, entertainment, and most importantly, live or recorded music. Music was something that cut through social barriers, uniting listeners across the city and countryside. As he grew older, Ford avidly listened to the emerging stars of country and Western, both on the radio and in person when traveling acts came through the Bristol area. These influences range from regional fiddlers to Western swing pioneers, from local church choirs to roadhouse guitar pickers. Because the radio was so central to community life, Ford's imagination was inevitably shaped by the magic he heard crackling through the speakers each evening. By high school, Ford's fascination with radio transformed from passive curiosity to burning ambition. He recognized that the person behind the microphone held a rare power, the ability to speak directly into the homes of thousands, delivering not only music, but also humor, advertisements, local news, and a friendly voice that made people feel less alone. In 1937, while still in his teens, he capitalized on a small but meaningful opportunity, landing a job as an announcer at WOPIAM for a modest wage of $10 a week. This was no flashy big market station, but for a young man longing for a career in broadcasting, WOPIAM represented an invaluable training ground. He learned on the fly, timing commercial breaks just right, introducing songs with sufficient flair to keep listeners engaged, and ensuring that the audio levels were balanced for folks tuning in on their living room radios. Although the station was small and resources were limited, Ford's experience there helped him hone the skills he would later use to capture nationwide audiences. Working at WOPIAM taught him the intricacies of pacing a show, modulating his voice and threading humor naturally into a broadcast. That comedic sensibility began to surface even this early in his career, as he discovered how a bit of well-timed levity could make any radio slot more inviting. At the same time, he built a rapport with his local audience, some of whom lived in remote areas and relied on radio broadcasts for their daily dose of music and companionship. It was a powerful lesson in connecting with people from all walks of life, which would serve him immensely when his broadcasts and recordings later reached millions around the country. Yet radio was only one piece of his emerging artistic identity. In 1938, Ford took a leap and decided to study classical music at the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music in Ohio. This was a striking choice for someone whose upbringing was steeped in gospel hymns and country tunes. The classical world demanded precise vocal techniques, discipline, and a deep understanding of music theory, skills that later distinguished him from many contemporaries in country and Western music. While his sojourn at the conservatory didn't last long, it exposed him to formal voice training, operatic repertoire, and an environment where technical rigor reigned. Though Ford eventually returned to the radio world, this formal exposure sharpened his ear and vocal control. When country performers were often praised for raw authenticity, Ford would stand out for a vocal quality enriched by classical foundations, giving him versatility for a variety of musical styles he'd explore in the decades to come. By 1939, he felt compelled to return to broadcasting, moving from station to station between Atlanta and Knoxville. Each station differed in musical preference and community engagement, so these moves broadened his sense of what radio could be. Some stations emphasized local news, while others put heavier focus on barn dance style programming. Ford took mental notes at every stop. This period was also one of intense networking. He met fellow announcers, technicians, and local musicians, each contributing to his evolving knowledge of show business. While the job wasn't always glamorous, salaries were lean, and he often worked long hours, he knew he was laying the groundwork for bigger possibilities. Furthermore, these experiences brought him face to face with the daily realities of the entertainment industry. He encountered disorganized studios, station managers who juggled tight budgets, and audiences whose tastes varied widely from region to region. Sometimes he had to handle live ads, introducing local sponsors who sold feed supplies or automotive services. Other times, he found himself organizing musical lineups for early morning country shows, ensuring each performer got a fair slot and that the tempo of the broadcast stayed lively enough to capture that breakfast hour energy. Through all this, he maintained a sense of humor and a knack for improvisation, traits that would become his signature when he later crafted the persona of Tennessee Ernie. These formative years were, in essence, a masterclass in the practical side of entertainment. Ford was absorbing not only the technicalities of radio, but also the intangible art of forging a connection with an audience he could not see. He learned the subtlety of comedic timing, knowing exactly when to interject a light joke, deliver a folksy anecdote, or introduce a poignant ballad to fit the mood of listeners. Because the medium was live, he developed confidence under pressure. If a record skipped, if a performer missed a cue, or if a piece of equipment malfunctioned, it was up to him to keep the show flowing smoothly. This humble beginning in local and regional radio, interspersed with a brief dalliance in classical training, laid a firm foundation for everything that followed. When World War II erupted and he found himself in military service, those experiences would shape how he handled high-stress situations and taught him the discipline crucial for success, be it on the battlefield or in a buzzing radio control room. In hindsight, one can see that young Ernest Jennings Ford was already honing the qualities: resilience, adaptability, humor, a passion for music that would eventually propel him from a small hometown station to the summit of national fame, military service, during the World War II. When World War II descended upon America and its allies, countless young men and women set aside their civilian aspirations to serve. Ernest Jennings Ford was no exception. Leaving behind his blossoming radio career, he joined the United States Army Air Corps, rising to the rank of first lieutenant. His specific role as a bombardier on a B-29 Superfortress placed him in a precarious but pivotal position. The B-29 was one of the most advanced aircraft of its time, designed for high-altitude, long-range bombing missions, typically targeting strategic sites in Japan. For Ford, who had been accustomed to the controlled environment of radio stations, the shift to flying missions over enemy territory was staggering. A bombardier's responsibilities went beyond simply dropping ordnance. He had to calculate altitude, speed, wind drift, and precisely time each release to hit crucial targets. Mistakes could cost lives both among Allied forces and civilians on the ground. The mental strain was immense. Day after day, these aviators put themselves at risk thousands of feet above unfamiliar terrain. For Ford, navigating these missions was an exercise in maintaining calm under extraordinary pressure, a skill that broadcasting had partially prepared him for. Announcing live on radio demanded a level head and the ability to adapt to unexpected events, but conducting precision bombing runs demanded courage on a whole new scale. In addition to his missions, Ford served as a bombing instructor at George Air Force Base in Victorville, California. This instructor role capitalized on the communication strengths he'd fostered through radio. Teaching the art of bomb targeting, mission planning, and safety protocols required clear instruction and the poise to command respect from recruits. Ford's innate ability to put people at ease, honed from years behind a microphone, found new purpose in the military environment. He was able to help rookies manage their apprehensions and understand the weight of their duties. The synergy of these roles, bombardier and instructor, allowed Ford to see the war from both frontline and training perspectives, illuminating just how vital each cog in the military machine was. For a man deeply enamored with music, being removed from the studio environment could have been stifling. However, the camaraderie he experienced among fellow servicemen offered new forms of connection. The Army Air Corps was a melting pot, drawing individuals from cities, farms, suburbs, and everywhere in between. In free moments, Ford found himself in spontaneous jam sessions where guitars, harmonicas, and even makeshift percussion accompanied the longing tunes that reminded them of home. This exchange of musical influences broadened Ford's horizons, reinforcing the idea that music transcended uniform, rank, or geographic origin. He listened to how others interpreted folk songs or jazz standards, and those experiences would later inform his own musical choices. On a more personal level, witnessing the toll of war likely intensified Ford's reliance on faith. In the cockpit of a B-29, far from the comforting sounds of a radio studio, the precariousness of life became glaringly evident. For someone raised in a region where church attendance and gospel hymns were integral parts of the cultural fabric, the threat of mortal danger might have drawn him even closer to the spiritual roots that would eventually define a significant part of his public persona. It's not difficult to imagine the seeds of his later gospel recordings being planted during moments of reflection in distant skies, or while consoling friends over the loss of comrades. War also shaped Ford's perspective on fame and success. Upon returning home, the stress of bombardier missions had reframed what he considered truly daunting. Early career hurdles, like audition rejections or on-air mishaps, paled in comparison to life or death scenarios faced during the war. This recalibration of personal challenges would serve him well in the frenetic world of 1950s entertainment, where constant public appearances, strict broadcast schedules, and performance pressures could be taxing. The military had taught him discipline and stoicism under stress, traits that would become invaluable once he was thrust under the bright lights of television, studios, and record deals. Many veterans, including those who would later become entertainers, found a public eager to celebrate their war contributions. So when he did return to radio and entertainment, Ford had the dual status of being both an up-and-coming broadcaster and a genuine war hero. This further bolstered his credibility, endearing him to audiences who saw in him a blend of patriotic service and folksy authenticity. He was no longer just the small-town boy from Bristol, Tennessee. He was now an Army Air Corps veteran whose calm voice over the airwaves carried the gravitas of someone who had faced life and death missions. Looking back on this phase, it's clear that his experiences in the war, particularly as a bombardier and instructor, played a defining role in shaping the man Ford would become. There was a balance between discipline and compassion, duty and humor, faith and fear, each dimension molded by the rigors of combat. These qualities would eventually find their way into every facet of Ford's post-war trajectory. His warmth on radio and television, his ability to relate to people from all backgrounds, and the poignant conviction in his gospel recordings all bore the indelible imprint of his years in uniform. When he finally returned to civilian life, he did so not just as Ernest Jennings Ford, but as a seasoned individual ready to transform his brand of entertainment into a national phenomenon. Early career in California and creation of Tennessee Ernie. After the war, Ford worked at radio stations in San Bernardino and Pasadena, California. At KFXM in San Bernardino, he was hired as a radio announcer and assigned to host an early morning country music disc jockey program, Bar Nothing Ranch Time. To make himself stand out, he created the persona of Tennessee Ernie, an exaggerated wild hillbilly character. His popularity grew, and he was soon hired by Pasadena's KXLA radio station. He also toured as a musician, and his warm-up bands included the Mayfield brothers of West Texas, Smokey Mayfield, Thomas Ed Mayfield, and Herbert Mayfield. Rise in radio and record deals. At KXLA, Ford continued his morning show and also became a vocalist on Dinner Bell Roundup, a live country show hosted by Cliffy Stone. Stone, a talent scout for Capitol Records, introduced Ford to the label in 1949. While still doing his morning radio show, Ford signed a contract with Capitol and became a local TV star on Stone's hometown jamboree. Ford's career in recording took off, and he released nearly 50 country singles in the early 1950s, many of which charted. Some of his early songs, including the Shotgun Boogie and Blackberry Boogie, were fast-paced boogie-woogie records featuring lead guitarist Jimmy Bryant and pedal steel guitarist Speedy West, crossover success and television fame. In 1950, Ford achieved crossover success with I'll Never Be Free, a duet with Capitol pop singer K-Star. Another duet, False Herd Girl with Ella Mae Morse, was a major seller in Capitol's country and hillbilly division. Eventually, Ford ended his morning show at KXLA and focused on Hometown Jamboree. He also took over as host of the TV version of College of Musical Knowledge in 1954. However, he became a household name in the U.S. after portraying the country bumpkin Cousin Ernie in 3 episodes of I Love Lucy in 1954. 16 Tons and National Stardom. In 1955, Ford recorded the Ballad of Davy Crockett, which reached number 4 on the country music charts. However, it was his rendition of 16 Tons that brought him unexpected mainstream success. Originally written and recorded by Merle Travis, In 1946, the song told the story of a coal miner's struggles. Ford's version, with its minimalistic arrangement, became a massive hit, reaching number one on the pop charts. Following this success, Ford hosted his own primetime variety show, The Ford Show, on NBC from October 4th, 1956 to June 29th, 1961. The title had a double meaning, as it referenced both his last name and the Ford Motor Company, which sponsored the program. Incorporation of gospel music. One of the most notable aspects of the Ford Show was its inclusion of a gospel hymn at the end of every episode. Despite objections from NBC and Ford's advertising agency, he insisted on keeping this segment. After receiving overwhelmingly positive viewer feedback, the hymn became the most popular part of the show. In 1956, Ford released Hymns, his first gospel music album, which remained on the Billboard Top Albums chart for 277 consecutive weeks. His album Great Gospel Songs won an Academy of Country Music Award in 1964 and was nominated for several others. Later, career and awards. After the Ford Show ended, Ford moved with his family to Portola Valley, Northern California. He also owned a cabin near Grangeville, Idaho, where he frequently retreated. From 1962 to 1965, he hosted the Tennessee Ernie Ford Show, a daytime variety program on KGO-TV in San Francisco, which aired nationally on ABC. In 1968, Ford narrated the Rankin-Bass animated Thanksgiving special The Mouse on the Mayflower for NBC. The character William the Church Mouse, who appears at the beginning of the special, was modeled after Ford in keeping with Rankin-Bass traditions. Although he left his own TV show, Ford continued to make guest appearances on programs such as The Dolly Show and Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters in the early 1980s. Over the years, Ford received 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for radio, records, and television. In 1984, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In 1990, he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Personal life and struggles with alcohol. Despite his accolades, fame, and undeniable musical legacy, Tennessee Ernie Ford's personal life was far more turbulent than his warm on-screen persona suggested. He married Betty Heminger on September 18, 1942, at a time when World War II was reshaping the destinies of many young Americans. Their union spanned decades, during which they raised 2 sons, Jeffrey Buckner Buck Ford, born in 1950, and Brian Leonard Ford, born in 1952. Publicly, Ford and Betty appeared to be the quintessential all-American couple. He, the country gospel star. She, the supportive wife who managed the household while he navigated the demands of show business. Behind closed doors, however, the couple wrestled with significant alcohol-related issues that permeated their family life. Betty had struggled with alcoholism and emotional health problems as early as the 1950s. At a time when discussing mental health or addiction was deeply stigmatized, she lived with her battles largely in the shadows. In many showbiz circles of that era, heavy drinking was often normalized as part of the lifestyle. Ford himself enjoyed alcohol, initially in what appeared to be moderate social settings, after a show or while relaxing with friends. But over time, his drinking escalated from a social habit to a dependency. By the 1960s, his consumption had grown heavy enough that those close to him began to worry about the effects on his well-being and career. Remarkably, Ford's public persona showed little sign of the growing turmoil. His comedic timing, resonant singing voice, and congenial hosting style remained intact through television appearances and recording sessions. On the surface, he continued to manage an exhaustive schedule, whether it was filming new episodes of a variety program or heading into the studio to record a gospel album. To audiences and many colleagues, he appeared as the same amiable man he had always been, an impression buttressed by the innate discipline he had honed during his radio and military years. Yet Betty's battles with alcohol and emotional distress intensified throughout the 1970s, and Ford's own reliance on alcohol followed a grim parallel trajectory. Tensions rose at home, with both Betty and Ernie grappling separately and together with the psychological weight of addiction. Their sons, Buck and Brian, grew up in an environment clouded by the unpredictability that often accompanies substance abuse. While they undoubtedly enjoyed material comforts thanks to Ford's celebrity income, they also bore witness to the strain that alcohol placed on their parents' marriage and their household dynamics. By the late 1970s, Ford's struggles had begun to take a more noticeable toll on his performances. Audiences who had followed him for decades spotted subtle changes in his stage demeanor, maybe a slurred line here, a momentary lapse in comedic pacing there. Producers and show organizers, protective of his reputation, typically downplayed these incidents. The industry norm was to maintain appearances, especially for a star whose brand was tied so closely to wholesomeness and sincerity. Nevertheless, rumors circulated that Ford wasn't entirely the same man he had been in the 1950s and 1960s. Meanwhile, Betty's condition worsened. She faced not only the physiological toll of her alcoholism, but also underlying emotional and mental health challenges that remained largely unaddressed. In 1989, she died by suicide linked to prescription drug misuse, a devastating end that starkly contrasted the family's public image. This event shook Ford to his core. Their decades-long marriage, fraught though it was, had been a central pillar of his life. With Betty's passing, he was forced to confront his own mortality, his dependence on alcohol, and the real impact these issues had on his family. Tragically, Ford himself refused to heed doctors' repeated warnings about his deteriorating liver condition. Medical professionals urged him to moderate or quit drinking, but he persisted. Some close to him speculate that after Betty's death, he carried a profound guilt or sense of helplessness that fueled rather than curbed his consumption. The show business ethic, the show must go on, may also have contributed to his reluctance to seek help. Admitting he had a serious problem might have felt tantamount to admitting he could no longer function as the entertainer the public revered. Death and legacy. A mere 4 months after Betty's death, Ford made the decision to remarry on September 28, 1991. While some observers questioned the timing, the more pressing reality was his deteriorating health. Decades of alcohol abuse had wreaked havoc on his liver. On October 17, 1991, he suffered catastrophic liver failure at Dulles Airport and was rushed to HCA Reston Hospital Center in Reston, Virginia. He passed away the same day at the age of 72. His death marked the end of an era for American entertainment, a final curtain call on a career that stretched from the golden days of radio to the twilight of 20th century television variety shows. Ford was laid to rest at Alta Mesa Memorial Park in Palo Alto, California, far from the Appalachian Hills where he was born, but close to the heart of the West Coast entertainment world where he made his name. Tributes poured in from fans, colleagues, and industry professionals who recognized that, despite his personal struggles, he had left a towering legacy. In obituaries and memorial segments, the recurring theme was his versatility, the beloved hillbilly persona who became a top-selling recording artist, the comedic actor who held his own alongside Lucille Ball, the television host who blended entertainment and spirituality, and the vocalist whose baritone could bring both laughter and tears. Moreover, Ford's life narrative, an all-American success story tinged with personal tragedy, continues to resonate in discussions about celebrity culture. He exemplifies the duality of fame, the accolades, the wealth, the stardom, and the heartbreak behind the scenes. Even as he collected awards like the Presidential Medal of Freedom and 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, his private battles with alcohol quietly eroded his health and happiness. In public tributes, admirers and media outlets have acknowledged this dichotomy, recognizing that genuine artistry and personal vulnerability often travel hand in hand. Another facet of Ford's legacy lies in how he championed gospel music on national television. Contemporary Christian artists, as well as more secular performers who incorporate spiritual themes, frequently credit him for paving the way. His primetime hymn segments validated faith-based content in a mainstream arena, long before specialized Christian networks or targeted streaming services existed. Even decades later, the memory of Ford's rich voice signing off with a hymn resonates with fans who recall him as both an entertainer and a man of faith. Beyond the music industry, Ford's name is occasionally invoked in broader cultural references. For instance, 16 Tons remains a staple in discussions about labor movements, coal mining heritage, and the themes of economic struggle that perennially surface in American life. The song's refrain continues to appear in advertisements, comedic skits, and documentaries, often as a shorthand for the plight of workers under corporate control. Ford's version captured something essential about the American working class experience, making it as culturally significant today as it was when it topped the charts. In a broader historical context, Ford's rise, military service, and subsequent superstardom mirror the arcs of many post-war celebrities who seized radio and television as new frontiers, yet few managed as seamless a transition as Ford did, from local announcer to national icon, while keeping hold of his signature down-home charm. His brand of humor, sincerity, and open appreciation of American roots music left an imprint that younger generations of country entertainers, and even pop musicians, still admire. They see in him a blueprint for genuine audience-friendly entertainment that doesn't shy away from the performer's personal identity. For fans and historians alike, Tennessee Ernie Ford represents a complex tapestry. A child of Appalachia, a World War II veteran, a comedic trailblazer, a chart-topping singer, a beloved TV host, an unwitting labor advocate through 16 Tons, a dedicated gospel performer, a recipient of the nation's highest civilian honors, and, tragically, a man whose private demons curtailed his final years. That tapestry remains intact, woven through decades of American cultural evolution, continually reminding us that the brightest stars can cast the darkest shadows. Ultimately, however, what lingers most powerfully is the resonant echo of his voice, a voice that lifted spirits, told stories, and at its best, helped people find solace or laughter in their own struggles. It's that gift of connection that ensures Tennessee Ernie Ford's place in the annals of music and entertainment history. Ford's rise from rural beginnings to national icon left a powerful mark on country music, pop, television variety shows, and even gospel recordings. His smash hit 16 Tons and heartfelt hymns continue to resonate with fans who admire his artistic range and genuine warmth. Yet the same open-hearted nature that made him a beloved star could not shield him from the devastating effects of alcoholism and personal tragedy. Ultimately, Ford's story is one of immense talent tinged with sorrow, an American legend whose voice still echoes through the halls of music history, even as we mourn the hardships and heartbreak he carried in his final years.